Imagine this, you're watching the first episode of an anime, you tune in and what you see is a spectacular display of animation power. The movement is incredible, the drawings are nearly flawless, it looks amazing. You finish the episode and go, that was insane, I wonder what the rest of this show has in store for me. Fast forward a few weeks and you realize the answer to that question is next to nothing. The first episode baited you in and the rest of the show fell apart right in front of your eyes. Cue that one Rod Wave song. The case I just described is an extreme, yes, although there are plenty of examples of that exact thing happening, but the phenomena itself is quite common. Call it a production collapse, call it a simple decline in quality, call it the production team front-loading an anime, call it bad management, call it whatever you want. The point is, anime episodes, more often than not, tend to fluctuate quite heavily in terms of quality. Of course, that's not a first episode only thing, that was just a hook to get you guys to click. While I will tackle the quote-unquote first episode curse in this video, that phenomena is part of a wider subject, one that has a massive role to play in the quality of an anime. This subject is schedule, or schedule if you want to sound American. If you have even a modicum of interest in the production side of anime, you'd be familiar with the two all-important T's of anime production. These of course being time and talent. These two factors determine the quality of a show, and schedule is just another word for the time component. And that's what this video is about, time. And I know what you're thinking, why does a topic like that need its own video? Isn't it simple? More time good, less time bad, isn't that all there is to this topic? Well, you're not exactly wrong, but like most things in the world, there's some nuance to it. Part of this video is inspired by a Sakuga blog article. I'll link it down in the description, check it out. Let's start with the basic stuff. How long does it take to produce an average episode of anime? Well, 2 to 3 months, that's the go-to time frame between the first rough frame of animation and the final product. But we can't exactly depend on that figure, it doesn't paint the complete picture, far from it. Let's instead look at that time period as the starting point and then go through the long list of exceptions and caveats, and while doing so, try to unpack the complex relationship between time and quality. Firstly, that 2 to 3 month window I talked about applies to an average anime episode, and an average episode doesn't look good. In fact, it looks more bad than good. A good looking episode naturally would take longer, but that too depends on other factors, the availability of talent for example. If an episode is produced by a small group of people, it'll take longer, and if it's produced by a larger group, the contribution made by each member would be less, and therefore the time needed would be less, but as a result, the episode will lack cohesion, the too many cooks principle. Jujutsukaisen Season 2 episodes 16 and 17 are textbook examples of both those scenarios. Episode 16 featured a large production window, allowing animators like So Miyazaki and Nakaya Onsen to animate huge chunks of content, while episode 17 was a behind-the-scenes nightmare. It featured a who's who of ace animators, but still suffered from several issues. Vinland Saga Season 2 is yet another example. The show boasted a long production window, but since the core team was small and lacked manpower, the project faced several challenges. Some episodes had it better than others. Episodes storyboarded by Atsushi Kobayashi, or episode 15, which featured multiple names from the AOT Final Season team, looked stronger than the rest of the show. Basically, not all episodes have the same amount of time allotted to them. They are instead divided based on priority. High priority episodes have longer production periods, while low priority episodes do not. Also, high priority episodes feature more talent, be it more of the core staff or freelancers. Jujutsu Kaisen 17 was a bit of an anomaly because in terms of talent it was about as high priority as it gets, but in terms of time it was the exact opposite. High priority episodes exist everywhere, even in shows that already have a high base level of quality. Mob Psycho Season 3 for example, every single episode from that show looked great, but episode 8 was clearly a cut above the rest. That of course is an ideal situation. In the real world, Mob Psycho's production is basically a fantasy. In the real world, some episodes have more time at the expense of others. That's just how the anime industry operates. This practice is particularly evident in long-running shows. Some Naruto and Black Clover episodes are clearly not like the others. Besides all that, the 3-month window at face value is quite misleading. Think about it, 3 months per episode equates to 36 months per 12 episodes, or 3 years. Do you think an average anime is worked on for 3 years? It's not even close. Most productions wrap up in under a year. How is that possible? Well, anime episodes are not produced one at a time. They don't finish episode 1, start with episode 2, finish it, and so on. Episodes are instead worked on in parallel by smaller, not particularly well-defined teams within a larger team. This practice allows the production team to work on multiple episodes at a time. That's also why a show usually features multiple episode directors and storyboard artists. In some cases, these groups might rotate, taking on multiple episodes. Of course, this division isn't set in stone, it's just a general formula productions rely on. Given how messy most modern productions are, things usually end up being more of a just grab whoever is available. Also, this division doesn't mean all 12 episodes are worked on simultaneously. 1, that would require way too many people. 2, that would completely annihilate the visual cohesion of the product. And 3, it would be a logistical nightmare. Batches of episodes are worked on at a time, and each episode is in a different state of completion. One episode might be in the layout stage, another might be colored, while another might be composited. Also, there's staff overlap between these smaller units. If that formula isn't enough, which is almost always the case, the team relies on outsourcing, a practice where they entrust a different company with part of or the entire episode, reducing the main team's workload. Outsourcing is everywhere and it's as old as anime itself. Just look at the original Astro Boy. These days, some shows rely quite heavily on outsourcing. Komi Can't Communicate, for example. Almost 2/3 of the show was fully outsourced to other companies. And that's basically how time is utilized by a production team when everything goes to plan. In the real world, however, not everything goes to plan. Production collapses, delays, that stuff happens all the time, just ask Aniplex. This usually happens due to poor planning. Planning, a step that's a part of the pre-production phase, is very important, and it's often overlooked by modern projects. When planned well, an anime can maintain a base level of quality and produce multiple highlights. An excellent example of that is Frieren. If you think Frieren had all the time in the world, you'd be incorrect. Yes, it had a large pool of named talent to work with, but at the end of the day, it was clever planning, resource management, and division of labor that made the creation of that 28-episode juggernaut possible. I have gone over this in detail before. Basically, planning is crucial. Given the current state of TV anime, it's impossible for every episode of a show to be high priority. Even spectacles like Jujutsukaisen and Chainsawman have their limits. Usually, a show can have 3 different types of highlights: the first episode, the last episode, and intermediate high priority episodes. Although most projects usually only contain the first 2, if that. The first episode of a show, we are slowly approaching the topic you thought this video was about. The first episode of a show is usually the strongest. They tend to have both ambition and execution, of course to a reasonable extent. The first episode is supposed to hook people in, so it makes sense for it to be ambitious, and at the same time, first episodes usually have the most lenient deadlines for reasons I'll cover in a minute, so the team has the time needed to execute said ambition. Although some shows take it way too far, creating a first episode so absurdly high quality that the rest of it cannot keep up. Examples include Uzumaki, a show I've covered in detail before, Ninjakamui, yet another show I've covered, the classic Detective Is Already Dead, and to a lesser extent, shows like Vistoria and Windbreaker, which did feature highlights outside of the first episode, but the execution was night and day. As the production progresses, delays start to pop up. Maybe the layout took an extra day, maybe the director was too much of a perfectionist, I'm looking at you, Yo Yoshinari. Maybe the animation director needed extra time, stuff like that. These delays start to compound over the course of a production and lead to a cascade of ever-increasing delays. Unfortunately, most shows are produced dangerously close to their air dates. In fact, the time a show airs for is often included in the production window, so if a show airs for 3 months, most of that time is considered to be a part of the production period. Or in other words, records, most episodes are finished just before their air date. So guess what happens when these delays start to pop up? That's right, the team is either forced to cut corners and deliver a substandard product, or in more extreme cases, they are forced to delay the episode altogether. If the team is lucky, the delay is only a week long. If they're not, we get a Zom 100 where they couldn't even come up with a release date for the last few episodes. That, by the way, is another situation I've covered in detail before. Because of these delays, the final episode of a show rarely manages to look as good as the first one. Season finales are supposed to be ambitious, yes, but tight deadlines prevent teams from executing that ambition. Besides these two examples, a show might feature intermediate high priority episodes. These can boast a different dedicated team, basically every Hakuyu Go episode, or the same core team as the rest of the show. For example, the two best looking solo leveling episodes. These high priority undertakings are usually allotted additional time. Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 Episode 16 was worked on for a lot longer than the rest of the episodes from that arc. More recently, Re:Zero Season 3 Episode 10 had a production window of a year and a half, according to episode director Yasuaki Fuji. Although keep in mind that includes the pre-production phase. High priority episodes feature three things: time, talent, and ambition. Zeroing in on any one factor can be misleading. Look at this cut from Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 Episode 8. I know I tend to overuse examples from JJK, but that's a production I followed closely and in real time, so I know a lot about it. Anyway, compare that cut to this one from episode 16. Night and day, right? Well, both those cuts were animated by the same guy, So Miyazaki. The difference is the level of ambition and presumably the lack of time. Also, the term high priority is relative. A low priority episode from a show like JJK will still look better than the high priority episode from a generic isekai. Prioritizing episodes is clever, yes, but at the same time, it's important to not overdo it. Over prioritizing one or a few episodes can cripple the rest. Projects like Uzumaki and Ninjakamui are classic examples of that. Even when things aren't that dramatic, there usually exists a visible cutoff point, a point in the show's episode count where the production collapses. This is present even in shows that never looked particularly good to begin with. Blue Lock, for example, season 1 that is, things really started to crumble just before the halfway point. I think that's when the collapse occurred, correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not going back to check. Hell's Paradise, another, let's be honest, bad looking show, really started to fall apart following episode 4. To avoid this from happening, some shows opt for a more consistent approach. This doesn't mean they don't feature highlights, it just means they try to maintain a base level of quality by avoiding overly spectacular highlights. My Hero Academia, for example. At the end of the day, that decision lies with the production team. They can either choose to prioritize certain episodes at the expense of the rest, or they can choose to divide their resources more evenly. Neither approach is necessarily wrong. So far, we considered shows in a vacuum, but in the real world, that's often not the case. Shows don't exist as their own isolated works, they are influenced by other seemingly unrelated projects. Whether it's multiple shows scrambling to hire from a limited pool of talent, or delays from one show impacting the schedule of the show the team was supposed to work on next. Here's an example. My Senpai is Annoying, a Studio Dogakobo project, was finished months before it aired. That's good, right? Things must have been smooth. Well, not exactly. The team working on that show was also supposed to work on Shikimori-san, which aired shortly after, so they had to rush. The best example of that phenomena, however, is Keisuke Seishimo-led Studio Mappa projects. Jujutsu Kaisen 0 aired in the month of December 2021, and Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 aired in the summer of 2023. That's well over 2 years if we include the time Season 2 aired for. Things must have been smooth, right? Oh boy. You see, Chainsawman was a thing. It aired in the fall of 2022 and it featured the same team/production line as Jujutsu Kaisen, meaning the gap between the two JJK projects meant absolutely nothing. Chainsawman ate into the production periods of both Jujutsu Kaisen 0 and Season 2, and as a result, all three shows struggled, Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 in particular. Long story short, the relationship between time and quality is complex, and it depends on a long list of factors, some of which we covered in this video. It's not as simple as more time good, less time bad. It's about the way the time is utilized and the availability of talent, amongst other things. The definition of a good schedule thus differs from show to show, and these nuances need to be accounted for when talking about this subject. That's about it. Liked the video? Check out this other bit of content on screen, like and subscribe, and until next time.